Hey guys, tonight we're stepping into a world where your alarm clock is a rooster with anger management issues. Your workplace is a stone hellscape that smells like charred meat and human desperation, and your boss has legal permission to beat you with a wooden spoon the size of your forearm. Welcome to life as a medieval castle kitchen servant. A job so relentlessly brutal that your modern 9 to 5 would feel like a spa vacation by comparison. Picture this. It's 3 a.m. on a February morning in 1320-something England, and you're waking up on a straw pallet that's basically a scratchy pancake filled with bug real estate. The stone floor beneath you is so cold it's actually pulling heat from your body like some medieval vampire. There's ice forming on the inside of the shutters. Your breath makes clouds, and you, lucky you, get to start the fires that will eventually warm the kitchen enough that you can feel your fingers again. Assuming you still have all your fingers by the time this career is over, which, spoiler alert, you probably won't. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And hey, I'm curious. Where are you watching from, and what time is it there? Drop your location and local time in the comments. I love seeing this community span the globe, from someone in Tokyo having their morning coffee to someone in Peru winding down after dinner. It makes this whole thing feel less like me talking into the void and more like we're all gathered around a campfire, except the campfire is my voice and nobody's in danger of actual medieval employment. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. The straw beneath you rustles as you force your protesting body upright. Every joint aches. Your back from yesterday's water hauling, your shoulders from the endless stirring, your knees from kneeling on stone floors that seem specifically designed to destroy cartilage. You're maybe 16 years old, though you stopped counting birthdays when you realize they only mark how many years you've survived in this position, and survival isn't exactly something to celebrate when the prize is doing it all again tomorrow. You fumble in the darkness for the rough woolen tunic you peeled off just 4 hours ago. It's still damp with yesterday's sweat, stiff with kitchen grease, and decorated with stains that tell the story of the past week's meals. Beet juice here, meat drippings there, something mysteriously green that you're trying not to think about. The fabric scrapes against your skin as you pull it over your head, and you're briefly grateful for the sensory distraction from the cold. The servants' quarters are a symphony of human misery at this hour. Someone 3 pallets over is coughing, that wet, rattling cough that's been getting worse for weeks and that everyone pretends not to notice because acknowledging illness means acknowledging that any one of you could be next. 2 stable boys are still snoring, dead to the world, and you feel a sharp pang of jealousy because they get to sleep until the almost reasonable hour of 4 a.m. Someone else is crying quietly. Probably the new scullery maid who hasn't yet learned that tears are a luxury you can't afford when you need every ounce of energy just to survive the day. You navigate the darkness through memory and touch. Your bare feet, shoes are for people with money, which is not you, finding the familiar path between sleeping bodies and scattered belongings. The door creaks when you open it. Everything in a medieval castle creaks, groans, or drips. It's like living inside a dying giant, and you step into the corridor that leads to your kingdom of smoke and suffering. The kitchen. The castle at this hour is a different beast entirely. During the day, it's controlled chaos. Servants scurrying, nobles strutting, dogs barking, merchants haggling in the courtyard. But now, in the dead hours before dawn, it's a cold stone maze filled with shadows that seem to move when you're not looking directly at them. Your footsteps echo off vaulted ceilings somewhere above you in the darkness. Torches in wall sconces have burned down to embers, giving off barely enough light to distinguish floor from wall. You pass the great hall, and even in darkness you can smell the lingering evidence of last night's feast. Spilled wine, meat grease, the sour tang of beer, and underneath it all, the ever-present medieval aroma of unwashed humans and poor sanitation. The rushes on the floor haven't been changed in weeks, and they're probably harboring enough food scraps, dog feces, and general filth to constitute a biological hazard that would make a modern health inspector weep. The kitchen door is massive, thick oak reinforced with iron, because apparently even the entrances to workspaces need to be intimidating in medieval times. You shoulder it open. It's always stuck, swollen with moisture and decades of accumulated grime, and step into the space that will claim the next 18 to 20 hours of your life. The first thing that hits you is the smell. Even cold, even with the fires dead, the kitchen reeks of centuries of cooking. Animal fat baked into the stone walls, smoke that's penetrated every surface, the metallic tang of blood that never quite scrubs out of the butchering table, and that special sour note that comes from inadequate medieval cleaning methods combined with constant food preparation. It's the kind of smell that gets into your hair, your skin, your clothes, until you can't remember what clean air tastes like. The second thing you notice is the cold. The kitchen, despite being the warmest room in the castle during working hours, is currently about the same temperature as a walk-in freezer. Your breath comes out in visible puffs. The stone walls are actually damp with condensation that will turn to ice by morning. The massive fireplace, big enough to roast an entire ox, which you'll actually do next week for the Lord's birthday feast, is nothing but a black maw filled with cold ash and the skeletal remains of yesterday's logs. This is where your real work begins, and let me tell you, starting the fires sounds so simple, doesn't it? So straightforward, like flicking a light switch or turning a knob on your gas stove. But you don't have matches. You don't have lighters. You don't have any of the convenient fire-starting technology that modern humans take for granted. What you have is a tinderbox, some char cloth that was made by partially burning linen in an airless container. Someone else's job? Thank God. A piece of flint, a steel striker, and the desperate hope that your fingers aren't too numb to make this work. You kneel beside the main hearth, and your knees immediately register their complaint about the cold stone floor, and begin the tedious process of coaxing fire from reluctant materials. Strike the steel against the flint. Watch for sparks. Try to catch a spark on the char cloth. Blow gently to encourage the ember. Not too hard or you'll extinguish it. Not too soft or it won't catch. Just right, like some medieval Goldilocks, except the consequence for getting it wrong isn't porridge temperature. It's your boss beating you and the entire kitchen staff going hungry because nothing can be cooked. Your first 3 attempts fail. The char cloth catches a spark, glows promisingly, then dies. Your fingers are already cramping from the cold and the repetitive motion. You can feel panic starting to build in your chest because the head cook will arrive in perhaps an hour. And if these fires aren't roaring by then, you'll learn firsthand why he's called William the Red. And it's not because of his hair color. It's because of how red his face gets when he's screaming at you. 4th attempt. The char cloth catches. You blow gently, steadily, watching the tiny ember glow brighter. You've got kindling ready. Tiny scraps of wood, bark, some straw you begged from the stables, and you carefully transfer the growing ember to this nest of flammable material. More gentle blowing. You're lightheaded from the effort, from the lack of oxygen, from the stress. The kindling smokes. Then, blessed relief, it flames. You've never been religious, not really, but in this moment you could kiss the feet of whatever saint is responsible for fire. You carefully add larger twigs, then small branches, building the fire with the care of someone constructing a house of cards in a windstorm. Too much wood too fast and you'll smother it. Too slow and it'll die before establishing itself. You've done this thousands of times, but it never becomes routine because fire is a living thing with moods and preferences and a tendency to die just to spite you. 20 minutes later, 20 minutes of constant attention, feeding, adjusting, you have a proper fire crackling in the main hearth. The warmth is already spreading, and you can feel your fingers again, which is wonderful, except now you can also feel the cuts and burns from yesterday, which is less wonderful. But there's no time to appreciate your accomplishment because you have 3 more hearths to light, and each one is its own battle against cold, moisture, and the fundamental unfairness of medieval technology. The second hearth is in the baking alcove, where the ovens are built into the wall like stone caves. This fire needs different characteristics, steady, even heat rather than the roaring flames of the main cooking hearth. You repeat the tinderbox ritual, and mercifully it works on the second try this time. The third hearth is for the cauldrons, those massive iron pots that will simmer soups and stews for hours. The fourth is a smaller one used for delicate sauces and the noble family special dishes, the ones that can't be contaminated by the smell of whatever the servants are eating. By the time all 4 fires are established and burning independently, you've been awake for nearly an hour and you're already exhausted. Your eyes sting from smoke. Your lungs feel coated in ash. Your knees are bruised from kneeling on stone. And your actual working day hasn't even begun. You hear footsteps in the corridor outside, heavy boots on stone. That'll be Jeffrey, the second cook, who's almost as mean as William but lacks the creativity in his insults. He shoulders through the door, takes one look at the burning hearths, and grunts. That's the closest you'll get to praise in this job. The absence of immediate violence. Water, he says, which is less a word and more a command embedded in a grunt. 20 buckets. Wells frozen again, use the river draw. Your heart sinks. The river draw means going outside the castle walls, down the slippery path to the river bank, breaking through the ice that's formed overnight, and hauling water back up. 20 buckets. That's roughly, you do the math in your head, about 160 gallons of water, at roughly 8 pounds per gallon. So you're about to carry over 1,200 pounds of water up a hill before the sun even rises. But you don't argue. You don't sigh. You don't even let your face show the despair you're feeling because Jeffrey is already looking for an excuse to cuff you, and insubordination, even the implied kind, is all the excuse he needs. You grab the wooden yoke that sits by the door, designed to balance 2 buckets across your shoulders, and you head back out into the pre-dawn darkness. As you walk through the castle corridors again, now slightly less dark as a few torches have been relit by other early rising servants, you pass a window that looks out over the surrounding countryside. The view would be beautiful if you had the time or energy to appreciate it. Rolling hills silhouetted against the first hint of dawn, stars still visible in the western sky, a fox or maybe a dog moving through the snow in the distance. But beauty is another luxury you can't afford, so you just register the view as information. It's going to be another freezing day. The snow will make the path treacherous, and that fox better not get into the meat storage or everyone in this kitchen will pay for it. You're 16 years old. You've been doing this for 2 years, and with every step toward the river, you're aware of a simple, terrible truth that you'll never speak aloud. You probably have another 30 years of this ahead of you, assuming something doesn't kill you first. And honestly, you're not sure which outcome you're hoping for anymore. The fires are alive now, crackling and popping with a hunger that mirrors your own stomach. You haven't eaten since yesterday's thin dinner of bread and whatever pot scrapings you could scrape together. But unlike your hunger, the fire's needs will actually be met. Your needs? Not so much a priority in the grand scheme of medieval castle economics. You're standing in front of the main hearth, and it's demanding your complete attention like a needy toddler made of flames and consequences. The thing about medieval cooking fires is that they're not just background elements. They're the entire infrastructure of your job, and managing them is a full-time occupation that happens simultaneously with all your other full-time occupations. Modern people have no concept of this. You turn a dial, push a button, maybe adjust a flame with a simple twist. Done. But you're conducting a symphony of combustion with instruments that actively want to fail. The main hearth is roughly 8 feet wide and 5 feet tall, a massive stone cavity that could comfortably fit 3 of you standing shoulder to shoulder. Right now it contains your carefully built fire, but within the hour it'll need to support a spit for roasting meat, hanging cauldrons at various heights, and possibly a griddle for flatbreads, all while maintaining different temperature zones because, and here's the fun part, different dishes require different heats and everything has to finish simultaneously. You feed another log into the flames, positioning it carefully. Oak. Because oak burns hot and long, and the head cook will literally check the wood pile to make sure you're not wasting the good fuel on getting things started. There's a hierarchy to firewood in a medieval kitchen that's more complex than most modern organizational charts. Oak for serious cooking, ash for quick, hot fires, beech for baking because it produces consistent heat, birch for kindling because it catches easily. Pine is forbidden near food because the resin makes everything taste like you're eating a Christmas tree. Historians still argue whether medieval cooks had a scientific understanding of different wood properties or if it was purely experiential knowledge passed down through generations of trial, error, and probably a lot of beatings. Either way, you know that if William catches you using pine anywhere near the meat roasting area, you'll be tasting your own blood along with that pine flavor. The fire needs constant feeding, but there's an art to it. Too much wood and you create thick, choking smoke that fills the kitchen and makes everyone's eyes water and their lungs burn. Too little and your temperatures drop, your roasts don't cook properly, your bread doesn't rise, and you might as well just resign yourself to a beating because disappointing the nobility's dinner expectations is a capital offense in the court of kitchen hierarchy. You're monitoring the color of the flames. Orange is good. Yellow means it needs more air. Blue at the base means it's getting proper oxygen when Agnes shuffles in. She's the other fire tender, a woman of maybe 30 who looks 50, with burn scars up both arms like she's wearing long gloves made of damaged tissue. She doesn't speak, just nods at you and heads to the baking hearth to begin her own temperature management nightmare. Ovens need building up, she croaks. Her voice always sounds like she's been gargling gravel, possibly from years of inhaling smoke, possibly from that time William grabbed her by the throat for oversalting a sauce. Lord's wanting white bread for breakfast, so we need steady heat, no fluctuations. White bread, of course, because the nobility can't possibly consume the dark, hearty bread that actually has nutritional value. No, they need bread so refined and white it's basically edible air held together by gluten and privilege. Making white bread requires flour that's been sifted multiple times to remove all the good parts, the bran, the nutrients, anything that might give it flavor or food value, and baking it requires absolutely consistent heat for an extended period. You watch as Agnes begins the delicate process of adjusting the baking oven's temperature. Unlike the open hearth, the ovens are enclosed spaces built into the walls, dome-shaped cavities made of brick and stone. You heat them by building a fire inside the oven itself, letting it burn until the bricks are radiating heat, then raking out the embers and putting the bread directly on the hot stone floor. It's baking by thermal mass, and getting the temperature right is more guesswork than science. There are no thermometers. Let me repeat that for the people in the back. There are no thermometers. You know the oven is ready when you can hold your hand inside for a count of 10 before the pain becomes unbearable. Different counts for different dishes. Bread is a 10 count. Delicate pastries might be a 15 count. Meat pies are a 7 count. And if you miscount, if your pain tolerance is different today than yesterday, if the humidity is affecting the heat distribution, well, you've just ruined several hours of work and wasted expensive ingredients, and we're back to the beating thing again. The quirkier reality that most people don't know? Medieval cooks sometimes threw a piece of white paper into the oven and judged the temperature by how quickly it browned. If it turned brown immediately, too hot. If it took several minutes, too cool. If it turned a light golden color in about a minute, just right. It's like the world's most stressful version of a chemistry experiment, except instead of a grade you get fed or beaten depending on the outcome. You're adding more fuel to the cauldron hearth. This one needs to be ready for the perpetual pottage that feeds the lower servants, a roiling mass of whatever vegetables are available, grains, and occasionally some meat scraps if everyone's lucky, when young Thomas stumbles in. He's maybe 12, new to the kitchen, and still has that look in his eyes that says he thinks this might get better. Give him a month. Fire's smoking too much, he says, pointing at the main hearth where, indeed, thick gray smoke is now billowing out instead of rising cleanly up the chimney. You suppress a sigh and head over to investigate. The problem is immediately clear. One of the logs has rolled forward, partially blocking the airflow, and now you're getting incomplete combustion. You grab the fire iron, a long metal poker that's one of your most essential tools, and carefully reposition the log. Immediately the smoke clears and the flames burn cleaner. Watch the wood placement. You tell Thomas, trying to sound authoritative rather than just exhausted. Everything needs air circulation. Fire breathes, same as you. He nods, scurrying away to tend to something else, and you make a mental note to check his work throughout the day because an improperly maintained fire can ruin hours of cooking in minutes. You've seen it happen. A collapsed log disrupts the coals, the temperature drops. A roast that should be done in 3 hours now needs 4, except the dinner service is in 3 hours, so everyone scrambles and panics and eventually serves meat that's raw in the middle, and then the Lord complains, and then William beats whoever was responsible, and if he can't determine who was specifically responsible, he just beats everyone on principle. The kitchen is warming up now, at least relatively speaking. It's gone from walk-in freezer to unheated garage in winter, which is progress. But you're sweating despite the chill because you're working close to fires that are hot enough to cook meat, in multiple layers of wool clothing that you can't take off because the moment you step away from the hearths you'll freeze. Jeffrey is now yelling at someone about vegetable prep, and you can hear the rhythmic thud of cleavers on butcher blocks starting up in the corner where the meat preparation happens. The kitchen is coming alive. filling with people and noise and the organized chaos that will define the next 16 hours. But the fires remain your primary responsibility, your constant concern, the thing that will either make or break this entire operation. You're mentally tracking all 4 hearths simultaneously. Main hearth needs another log in approximately 10 minutes. Baking oven is probably ready for Agnes to rake out the embers in 20 minutes. Cauldron hearth is stable for now. Sauce hearth needs its embers redistributed to create a cooler zone on the left side for the reduction that William will start in an hour. You're also tracking fuel consumption because you'll need to send Thomas to the wood store for more oak before the mid-morning rush. And you need to remember to save the ash from the main hearth because it gets mixed with water to create lye for cleaning. And you'll never again take modern dish soap for granted. Once you've tried to scrub grease off iron pots using lye that burns your hands while simultaneously not working very well. The door crashes open and William the Red makes his entrance. He's a massive man, tall and broad with arms like tree trunks from years of wielding heavy pots and cleaver. His face is, as promised, very red, partially from the heat he works in, partially from his apparent state of perpetual rage, partially from what you suspect is high blood pressure that will kill him in about 15 years when his heart finally gives out from stress and medieval diet. Fires, he bellows, because William only has 2 volumes. Loud and deafening. Temperatures. This is your cue to report. You straighten up, trying to look competent and not like someone who's been awake for 2 hours on 4 hours of sleep after 20 hours of work yesterday. Main hearth is at roasting temperature, steady heat, ready for the morning spit. You recite, the words coming automatically from repetition. Baking oven is ready for ember raking. Agnes has it at bread temperature. Cauldron hearth is established and stable for the pottage. Sauce hearth is prepared for delicate work. Cool zone established. William grunts, which is basically a standing ovation in his language. He moves to the main hearth and, without warning, without protection, thrusts his bare hand toward the flames, holding it there while he counts under his breath. You watch, simultaneously impressed and horrified. His hand is maybe 6 inches from flames hot enough to cook meat, and he holds it there for a slow count of 8 before withdrawing. Good, he says. Don't let it drop. Lord's having guests for dinner, we're doing the swan. Your stomach drops. The swan, of course, because a normal roasted chicken or even a peacock isn't fancy enough. No, the nobility needs swan, which is tough, gamey, requires hours of careful roasting, and has to be presented in full plumage as if it's still alive, which means you'll be spending part of your afternoon carefully reattaching feathers to a cooked bird in some grotesque arts and crafts project from hell. The swan requires absolutely consistent heat for 6 to 8 hours. No temperature fluctuations, no hot spots, no moments where you're distracted by literally anything else and let the fire die down or flare up. It's a marathon of fire management, and you've just learned you're running it today. Yes, sir. You say, because what else can you say? I'll not let you down, sir. You better not, William says, and there's the implied threat hanging in the air like smoke, or else. He moves on to terrorize someone else, and you're left staring at your fires, doing mental calculations. Swan goes on the spit at mid-morning, so you've got maybe 2 hours to establish a perfect, stable temperature. That means building up a deep bed of coals, not flames, coals that will radiate steady, even heat. It means selecting wood that will burn down to quality coals, feeding it in at precise intervals, and basically becoming one with this hearth for the rest of the day. You add another oak log, then another, positioning them to create the coal bed you'll need. The fire is beautiful in its own way, mesmerizing, the flames dancing and curling in patterns that seem almost alive. For a moment, just a brief moment, you let yourself zone out, watching the play of light and shadow, feeling the heat on your face. Then a pot boils over somewhere behind you. Someone screams, Jeffrey is shouting about incompetence, and you snap back to reality. There's no time for daydreaming, no space for mental rest. The fires need you, and unlike every other demanding element of this job, at least the fires are predictable. Feed them, give them air, keep them balanced, and they'll perform. It's more than you can say for the humans in this kitchen. The fires are stable, which means William has moved on to his next victim, and you've earned approximately 45 seconds of not being screamed at. This is the perfect time for the universe to remind you that fire management is only one circle of your personal hell. Now it's time for the water hauling. And if you thought the fire situation was exhausting, just wait until you've climbed 70 stone steps while carrying 60 pounds of liquid sloshing around in wooden buckets that are older than your grandmother. Jeffrey appears beside you with the timing of someone who's been watching and waiting for you to finish the fire work. "River draw," he says again, and hands you not just the yoke but also a wooden chit, a small carved token that proves you're authorized to leave the castle grounds. Because apparently even fetching the water that keeps this entire operation running requires paperwork in the medieval world. You hoist the yoke onto your shoulders. It's worn smooth in the center from years of contact with human shoulders and necks, which sounds almost comforting until you realize it's smooth because it's been grinding away at human flesh for decades. And head for the door. The buckets dangle from either end, empty for now, clanking against each other with a hollow wooden sound that will haunt your dreams. The castle is properly awake now. Servants scurry through corridors, carrying linens, chamber pots. You're grateful you're not on that duty. Bundles of firewood for the Lord's private chambers. Guards are changing shifts with that special shuffle of men who've been standing in armor all night and can't wait to sit down. A few noble children run past, probably heading to break their fast. And they don't even glance at you because to them you're furniture that moves. You exit through the kitchen side door, the one that leads to the service courtyard rather than the main castle entrance, because God forbid the nobility has to witness the actual labor that supports their lifestyle. The morning air hits you like a slap. It's that special kind of cold that feels personal, like winter has a grudge specifically against you. Your breath comes out in clouds so thick you could practically grab them. The courtyard is a mess of mud, ice, and other substances you try not to identify. Chickens peck at frozen ground, optimistic despite the lack of anything remotely peckable. A pig roots in a corner, probably having escaped from the sty again. Someone's hung laundry on a line strung between buildings, and the frozen shirts and tunics hang like flat ghosts, preserved mid-flutter by ice. You show your chit to the guard at the gate. A bored-looking man named Peter who you've known for years, and who still makes you show the chit every single time because rules are rules and Peter is nothing if not consistent. He waves you through without comment, and you step outside the castle walls into what feels like a different world entirely. The path down to the river is treacherous in winter. In summer, it's just a dirt track, easy enough to navigate. In autumn, it's muddy but manageable. In winter, it's a death trap disguised as a walking path. Ice has formed in sheets over the mud, creating a surface that's somehow both slippery and uneven. Tree roots stick up at random intervals, waiting to catch your foot. The slope is steep enough that going down requires careful attention, and coming back up while carrying water will require the kind of determination usually reserved for people climbing Mount Everest. You start your descent taking small, careful steps. The yoke across your shoulders is already digging in, and you're not even carrying water yet. You can feel the specific spots where bruises are forming, the same spots that bruised yesterday and the day before and every day before that, bruises on top of bruises in a geological layering of damage. About halfway down, your foot hits a patch of ice and slides out from under you. For a horrible moment you're weightless, arms windmilling, the empty buckets swinging wildly and throwing off your balance further. Then you crash down hard on your hip and side, sliding several feet before a tree root mercifully stops your descent. Pain explodes through your hip and shoulder. The buckets have gone flying, clattering down the path ahead of you. You lie there for a moment taking inventory. Nothing broken, probably, just bruised like everything else about you. You can hear the river ahead, that particular sound of water moving over rocks that would be peaceful in literally any other context. Right now it just sounds like more work. You get up, wincing, and retrieve the buckets. One has a fresh crack along the rim. Fantastic, that'll make it leak. And you'll need to tell Jeffrey and he'll probably blame you for falling even though these paths are maintained by exactly nobody. You continue down more carefully and finally reach the river bank. The river is partially frozen, just as Jeffrey warned. Ice has formed along the edges and in the slower moving sections, but the main current is still flowing, dark water sliding past with that black, vaguely threatening look that winter water always has. Someone, probably yesterday's water carrier, has already broken through the ice at the bank to create a drawing point, but overnight it's scabbed over with a thin layer of new ice. You find a rock and smash through the new ice, creating a hole big enough to dip your buckets. Then comes the fun part. Filling the buckets without falling into the river, because if you fall into winter river water you will die. Not might die, not could die, will die. Hypothermia will get you in minutes, and even if you somehow drag yourself out, you'll be soaking wet in freezing temperatures with a steep climb ahead of you. It's not survivable. You kneel at the edge, your knees immediately scream their protest about kneeling on frozen rocks, and carefully lower the first bucket into the current. Water rushes in with shocking force, and you have to brace yourself to keep from being pulled forward. The bucket fills, becomes heavy, and you haul it back up and set it aside. The water sloshes, some spilling over and soaking your hands. Your hands are now wet and the air temperature is well below freezing. Within seconds, your fingers are burning with cold, then going numb. You work as quickly as you can, filling the second bucket, but by the time you're done you can barely feel your hands. You dry them as best you can on your tunic, which just makes your tunic wet and cold, great, and then you have to figure out how to attach these buckets to the yoke when your fingers don't want to cooperate with fine motor control. The buckets hang from the yoke on ropes, and tying wet rope with numb fingers is like trying to perform surgery with mittens on. You fumble with the knots, pulling them tight, testing the weight distribution. If one bucket is significantly heavier than the other, the yoke will be unbalanced and your neck and shoulders will pay for it all the way up that hill. Finally, satisfied that everything is as secure as it's going to get, you hoist the yoke onto your shoulders. The weight settles with brutal finality. 60 pounds, distributed across your shoulder and neck, pressing down on exactly the same spots that were bruised yesterday. You take a moment to adjust, finding that sweet spot where the weight is balanced, and then you begin the climb. 3 steps in, you remember why you hate this part of the job with a passion that borders on religious fervor. The path up is everything the path down was, but worse because now you're carrying 60 pounds and going uphill and trying not to spill because every cup of water you spill is a cup you'll have to come back down and replace. Your legs burn within minutes. Your shoulders scream. The yoke digs into your neck and you can feel it compressing your spine, probably shaving millimeters off your height with every trip. You have to take it slow. 1 step, make sure your foot is stable, shift your weight, next step. The bucket swings slightly with each movement, sloshing water that you can hear but can't see. A constant reminder that you're 1 slip away from losing it all. Your breath comes hard and fast, clouds of steam in the frozen air. Sweat is forming under your layers of clothing despite the cold. And you know from experience that once you stop moving, that sweat will turn icy and you'll be even colder. About 1/3 of the way up, you have to stop and rest. You carefully lower the yoke onto a flat rock, giving your shoulders a break. The relief is immediate and almost overwhelming. The absence of pressure feels like blessing. You roll your shoulders, trying to work out the knots and check the buckets. You've spilled maybe half a cup total, which is actually pretty good for you. A quirky little detail that most people don't know. Medieval water carriers sometimes put a layer of oil on top of the water to prevent sloshing. Just a thin film of cooking oil or even lard, floating on the surface, and it dampens the wave motion enough to reduce spills. You've tried it a few times, but Jeffrey doesn't like wasting oil on such things, so mostly you just deal with the sloshing and try not to lose too much. You hoist the yoke again and continue climbing. Your legs are shaking now, muscles fatiguing from the combination of weight and incline. You focus on your breathing, trying to find a rhythm. In for 4 steps, out for 4 steps. Don't think about the top being far away. Don't think about how you have to do this 19 more times to get Jeffrey's 20 buckets. Just think about the next step. You pass the spot where you fell earlier, and you're extra careful here, testing each foothold. The castle walls loom above you now, close enough that you can see individual stones. The patches where mortar has crumbled and been replaced. The darker sections where rain has stained the walls. Finally, blessedly, you reach the top. Your legs are jelly. Your shoulders feel like someone's been beating them with hammers. You're drenched in sweat under your tunic. But you've got 2 buckets of water, and you carefully navigate back through the gate, Peter nods without interest, and into the kitchen. The heat hits you like a wall, such a stark contrast from outside that you actually gasp. The kitchen is fully operational now. Agnes is pulling loaves from the baking oven. Thomas is turning a spit over the main hearth. 2 scullery maids are scrubbing pots with sand and water. Jeffrey is chopping something with violent enthusiasm, and William is tasting from a pot while making the kind of face that suggests someone is about to get yelled at. You pour your 2 buckets into the massive water barrel that sits near the main hearth. It holds maybe 60 gallons when full, and it's currently half empty, and head back out for trip number 2. By trip 5, your shoulders have gone from pain to numbness to a kind of transcendent agony where you can't actually distinguish between the different sources of hurt anymore. It's just generalized suffering. By trip 10, you've developed a shuffling walk that minimizes the sloshing, and you've stopped trying to avoid the muddy patches because you're already filthy and wet and what's a little more mud between you and rock bottom. By trip 15, you're running on pure automation. Your brain has essentially shut down higher functions. You're a water-carrying robot, a medieval pack mule, a beast of burden in human form. Trip 18, you slip on the path and go down hard again, this time on the same hip you bruised earlier. The buckets fly off the yoke, and you watch in horror as they tumble down the slope, water spraying in glittering arcs in the morning sun that's finally risen. Both buckets end up in the river. You want to cry. You're so tired you could sleep on these frozen rocks. But crying won't get the buckets back, won't refill them, won't make the climb any easier. So you limp down the slope, fish the buckets out of the river, getting your arms soaked to the elbow in ice water in the process, and start again. By trip 20, you're done. The barrel is full. You've carried roughly 1,200 pounds of water up a 70-step slope 20 times. Your shoulders have permanent dents in them. You're pretty sure your spine is compressed by at least an inch. Your hip is screaming. Your hands are raw and red and cracked from the cold and wet. Jeffrey doesn't thank you, doesn't acknowledge the accomplishment, just nods at the full barrel and says, "Good, cauldrons need filling. Then the washing tubs. Then the soaking vats for tonight's peas." Historians still argue whether the medieval water supply system was brilliantly efficient for its time or stupidly labor-intensive when natural springs could have been diverted with basic Roman engineering that they'd somehow forgotten. You're firmly in the stupidly labor-intensive camp, but nobody's asking your opinion. You grab a smaller bucket and start transferring water from the barrel to the various pots and tubs that need it. This is lighter work, at least no climbing, no ice, just walking back and forth across the kitchen dozens of times. Your feet develop a new appreciation for flatness. A scullery made bumps into you, spilling half a bucket down your front. The water is cold, drawn from the barrel before the heat of the kitchen had any chance to warm it, and it soaks through your tunic instantly. You gasp, then bite back any complaint because the scullery maid looks terrified, and you remember being new and scared. "It's fine," you mutter. "Just watch where you're going." She scurries away, and you're left standing in wet clothes, in a hot kitchen, somehow managing to be both sweating and shivering simultaneously. You look down at yourself, soaked, muddy, bruised, exhausted, and you've been awake for maybe 4 hours. You have 14 more hours of this ahead of you today. The water is done for now. But you know there'll be more later. There's always more water needed, more hauling, more carrying, because medieval cooking uses water for everything and conservation isn't really a concept when the solution to "we need more" is just make the servants carry more. Your shoulders throb in time with your heartbeat. Your hip is stiffening up where you fell. Your hands are cracked and bleeding slightly at the knuckles. And the swan hasn't even started roasting yet. The morning light is filtering through the high, narrow windows of the kitchen now. Those thin slits in the stone walls that are designed more for defense than illumination. The light catches the smoke and steam, creating beams that slice through the chaos. And for a moment the kitchen looks almost mystical, like some kind of hellish cathedral dedicated to the god of endless labor. But there's no time for atmospheric appreciation because William is shouting your name and pointing toward the butchery corner, and your stomach drops because you know what's coming. The slaughter day. Of course it is. Because water hauling wasn't enough character building for one morning. Now you get to participate in the violent transformation of living creatures into dinner. The butchery area is separated from the main kitchen by a low stone wall, probably because even medieval people recognize that watching animals die while you're eating breakfast is somewhat unappetizing. It's a space of scarred wooden tables, hooks embedded in ceiling beams, gutters carved into the floor for blood drainage, and an overwhelming smell of iron and viscera that no amount of scrubbing ever fully removes. Today's victims are already here. 3 pigs, a sheep, and a truly unfortunate number of chickens in wicker cages, all making the kinds of noises that suggest they know exactly what's about to happen. The pigs are grunting nervously, pushing against the fence of the temporary pen that's been set up. The sheep is just staring at nothing with those rectangular pupilled eyes that make them look either serene or completely dead inside. Impossible to tell which. Robert the butcher is already there, sharpening his knives on a whetstone with long, practiced strokes that create a rhythmic scraping sound. Robert is missing 3 fingers on his left hand. Not from butchering accidents, surprisingly, but from a bar fight in his youth, and he's the kind of man who seems to have no emotional reaction to anything. He could be cutting up a pig or whittling a piece of wood or watching a sunset, and his face would show the exact same mild, distant expression. "Hold or cut?" he asks without looking up from his sharpening. "Hold," you say, because you've done this enough times to know your role. The newer servants get cutting duty, where they can't mess up too badly. The experienced servants get holding duty, which requires strength, timing, and the ability to not flinch when things get messy. "Pig first," Robert says. "Big one." You move to the pen and eye the 3 pigs. The big one is obvious. A massive sow that probably weighs close to 250 pounds, with bristly hair and small, intelligent eyes that are currently fixed on you with what you swear is accusation. Pigs are smart. Too smart. That's what makes this worse than chickens, which are basically dinosaurs running on firmware from the Jurassic period and have no idea what's happening ever. The trick to moving a pig that doesn't want to move is momentum and commitment. You can't hesitate because they'll sense it and you'll lose any advantage. You vault the low fence, grab the sow by the ears. She squeals immediately, a sound that's designed by evolution to be maximally distressing to human ears, and you use your body weight to turn her head and get her moving toward the opening. She resists, of course, planting her feet and leaning back against your grip. Pigs are dense muscle under that fat, and this one is strong. You're already tired from the water hauling. Your shoulders are screaming, but you plant your feet and pull. Someone opens the gate and you drag the sow through, Robert and Thomas helping to guide her toward the butchering table. This is where it gets medieval level intense. The sow needs to be stunned before slaughter. It's more humane, and also thrashing animals are dangerous and make the butchering harder. Robert has a heavy wooden mallet, and he positions himself carefully, waiting for the right moment. You're holding the sow's head as still as you can, which is like trying to hold a furious boulder that's determined to escape. Robert swings. The crack of wood on skull is sickeningly loud. The sow's legs buckle immediately and she goes down. Not dead but stunned, her eyes rolling back. You've got maybe 30 seconds before she starts to recover, so everyone moves fast. You and Thomas drag the sow onto the slaughter table, a massive wooden thing that's stained nearly black with decades of blood, and Robert moves in with the killing knife. This is the part you've never gotten used to, probably never will. The knife goes in at the throat, finding the major blood vessels, and then there's just so much blood. It comes out in pulses, hot and red and shocking in its volume, flowing into the gutters that channel it toward collection buckets. The smell of blood is overwhelming, metallic, sweet, and somehow intimate, like you're experiencing something you shouldn't be witnessing. The sow twitches and kicks reflexively, even though she's dying, and you have to hold her steady to keep her from falling off the table. This is the part where modern people would probably pass out or vomit or both. You've seen new servants do exactly that. There was a boy last year who took one look at the blood and just collapsed, cracked his head on the stone floor, ended up with a concussion on top of his weak stomach. But you've been doing this twice a week for 2 years, and you've learned to distance yourself mentally, to think about something else, to focus on the technical aspects rather than the existential horror. The sow stops moving. Robert checks for a pulse at the throat, nods to himself, and begins the next phase. Scalding and scraping. There's a massive cauldron of boiling water that's been heating over one of your carefully maintained fires, because of course there is, because every single task in this kitchen requires fire management. The water is literally boiling, bubbling and steaming and absolutely ready to remove several layers of your skin if you're not careful. You and Thomas hoist the dead sow, and let me tell you, 250 pounds of dead weight is so much heavier than 250 pounds of living, struggling weight, and maneuver her toward the scalding cauldron. It's a delicate operation. Too little time in the hot water and the hair won't scrape off easily. Too much time and you start cooking the outer layer of skin and the meat underneath, which affects the quality. Robert has a system. 30 seconds. Roll. 30 seconds. Roll. He chants, and you follow his rhythm, dunking sections of the carcass into the boiling water. Steam rises in clouds, bringing with it the smell of wet pig and hot bristles, which is exactly as unpleasant as it sounds. Your hands are getting splashed with droplets of scalding water, little burning kisses that you ignore because if you let go now the whole carcass could slide into the cauldron and then you'd have boiled pork instead of prepared carcass and William would probably make you fish it out with your bare hands as punishment. After the scalding comes the scraping. Robert has special scrapers, curved metal blades that you drag across the skin to remove the loosened hair. It comes off in wet clumps, revealing the pale pink skin underneath. You work in teams, scraping from different angles, removing every bristle because the nobility doesn't want to bite into a roast and find pig hair, obviously. A quirky historical detail. Some medieval kitchens saved the scraped pig hair and sold it to brush makers. Nothing got wasted in the medieval economy. Not even the literal hair scraped off a pig corpse. You're not sure if your kitchen does this. You've never seen where the hair goes after it's swept up, and you've learned not to ask too many questions about the disposal systems around here. The scraping done, Robert begins the gutting. This is skilled work you're not trusted to do because one wrong cut and you puncture the intestines and contaminate all the meat with fecal matter, which would be a disaster of epic proportions. Robert makes a careful incision from sternum to groin, and the internal organs start to slide out, held in place by connective tissue and his careful hands. The smell hits you like a physical force. If you thought blood smelled intense, intestines are a whole different category. It's the smell of digestion, of stomach contents, of things that are supposed to stay inside bodies. Your eyes water. You breathe through your mouth, which just makes you taste it, which is somehow worse. Robert is removing organs with practiced efficiency. The heart, the liver, the kidneys, these go into one bucket because they're edible, even valuable. The liver especially will probably end up in a pâté for the Lord's table. The intestines, the stomach, the bladder, these go into a different bucket. The intestines will be cleaned and used as sausage casings, because again, nothing gets wasted. Catch, Robert says, and hands you the stomach. It's heavy, sloshing with partially digested pig food, and warm in a way that makes your skin crawl. You carry it carefully to the cleaning tub, where one of the scullery maids will have the joy of emptying and scrubbing it. The pig is now essentially hollow, a carcass ready for butchering into useful cuts. But there's no time to admire Robert's handiwork because there are two more pigs, a sheep, and those chickens waiting. The second pig goes faster, you know the rhythm now, you're warmed up, such as it is, and this one is smaller, maybe 180 pounds. Stun, bleed, scald, scrape, gut. It's becoming routine, which is disturbing when you think about it, so you don't think about it. The third pig squeals louder than the others, somehow knowing it's last, and that being last means watching the others go first. You feel a twinge of something, guilt, sympathy, but you shove it down because sentimentality doesn't feed a castle full of people and definitely doesn't save you from beatings. The sheep is different. Sheep are somehow both easier and harder than pigs. Easier because they're lighter, less aggressive, more docile. Harder because those eyes, those weird rectangular pupils, seem to look right through you to the part of your soul that's dying incrementally with each day in this kitchen. Robert slits the sheep's throat with practiced efficiency. The blood flows, the sheep collapses, and then comes the skinning because sheep you skin rather than scald. The wool is valuable, needs to be removed intact for sale to textile makers. Robert makes careful cuts, peeling the skin away from the flesh underneath in one large piece. It's grotesque and fascinating at the same time. You can see the muscle structure, the fat layers, everything that's usually hidden under skin and fleece. The chickens are last, and they're almost a relief because chickens are small enough that you can process them quickly, and they're too stupid to make eye contact that makes you question your life choices. There are 12 of them, and you work through them in an assembly line. Grab chicken, axe to the neck. There's a special stump with grooves worn into it from years of beheadings. Let it bleed out, dunk in hot water, pluck feathers, gut. The feather plucking is tedious work that makes your fingers ache. Each chicken has hundreds of feathers, and they need to come out completely. No one wants to bite into roasted chicken and get a mouthful of feather. The hot water loosens them, but you still have to pull each one. And the small pin feathers are the worst, tiny little things that your fingers can barely grip. By the time all 12 chickens are plucked and gutted, you're covered in blood, wet from scalding water, dusted with pig bristles and chicken feathers, and you smell like death and viscera. Your hands are raw from hot water and rough work. There's blood under your fingernails that will stay there for days no matter how much you scrub. Historians still argue whether medieval people were desensitized to animal slaughter because they saw it regularly, or whether they maintained the same emotional response modern people have and just powered through it out of necessity. You can't answer that definitively, but you can say that you've never stopped hating this part of the job, you've just gotten better at hiding it. Robert is now breaking down the pig carcasses into primals, separating shoulders from loins, removing the legs, sectioning the belly. These cuts will be further processed into specific dishes. The loin for roasting, the belly for bacon, the shoulders for sausage, the head for head cheese, which is exactly as horrifying as it sounds. The offal, all those internal organs, needs further processing. Intestines must be cleaned, which means forcing water through them repeatedly until they run clear. A process that takes hours and makes your hands smell like pig digestion for days. The liver needs to be trimmed of any bile-stained sections. The heart needs to be cleaned of blood clots. You're assigned to intestine cleaning naturally because the universe has a sense of humor. You take the coiled mass of pig intestines to a tub of water and begin the process. Force water through from one end. Watch it come out brown and disgusting from the other end. Empty the tub. Refill with fresh water. Repeat. Over and over until the water finally runs clear. It's mind-numbing work. Standing at a tub, forcing water through tubes of pig intestine, surrounded by the ongoing chaos of the kitchen. You can hear William shouting about something. Agnes is singing to herself while she kneads dough. A tuneless humming that's probably keeping her sane. The fires crackle and pop. Metal clangs against metal. Your swan is supposed to go on the spit soon. You need to get these intestines done and cleaned up and back to fire management before William notices you're behind schedule. You work faster, your hands moving automatically, brain on autopilot. Finally, mercifully, the intestines are clean. You hang them to dry on special hooks. They'll be used later for sausage making, stuffed with ground meat and seasonings and twisted into links. You wash your hands and arms as best you can with lye soap that burns your cracked skin, scrubbing away the blood and viscera and general horror of the morning. You check your fires. The main hearth has died down slightly, you were away too long. You add wood, adjust the coals, bring it back up to temperature. The swan is waiting, plucked and gutted. Someone else did that. Thank God. Ready to be mounted on the spit. It's a magnificent bird, even dead. Swans are huge. This one probably weighs 20 pounds. With long necks and an elegance that persists even in death. The meat will be tough and gamey, not particularly delicious, but that's not the point. The point is showing off, demonstrating wealth and power through the consumption of a royal bird. You secure the swan onto the iron spit, running the rod through the body cavity and out through the neck, making sure it's balanced so it will rotate evenly. The spit goes onto the hooks above the main hearth, and you begin the slow rotation, turning it manually every few minutes to ensure even cooking. Your morning has been: wake at 3 a.m., light fires, haul 1,200 pounds of water up a hill, participate in the slaughter and processing of 3 pigs, 1 sheep and 12 chickens, and now you're roasting a swan. It's not even noon yet. The swan rotates slowly over the fire, fat beginning to drip and sizzle in the coals below, creating small flare-ups that you have to watch carefully because uneven heat means uneven cooking means a disappointed noble means William's hand across your face. Your hands are already developing a rhythm, quarter turn, wait, check the color, quarter turn. That will continue for the next 6 hours. 6 hours of standing in front of a fire hot enough to roast meat, in a kitchen that's already sweltering, turning a dead bird while your brain slowly melts from boredom and heat exhaustion. But at least you're just turning the spit, right? At least you're not doing anything else simultaneously, right? Wrong. So beautifully, medieval ly wrong. Onions, William barks from across the kitchen. 2 bushels, minced fine, for the pottage and the sauce and the stuffing. Move. Your heart sinks. 2 bushels of onions is roughly. You do the mental math. approximately 100 pounds of onions that need to be peeled and minced into tiny pieces, while you're also turning the swan and maintaining the fires, and presumably continuing to exist as a human being with physical limitations, though William doesn't seem to recognize that last part as a legitimate concern. Thomas appears beside you, struggling under the weight of a massive wicker basket filled with onions. He dumps them next to your station with a thud that suggests he's as thrilled about this as you are. The onions are winter storage onions. They've been hanging in the root cellar for months. Some of them are starting to sprout. Many have soft spots. All of them have that concentrated onion intensity that comes from aging. You grab a knife from the rack, a blade that's been sharpened and resharpened so many times the metal is worn into a curve, and pull the first onion from the basket. The papery skin crackles as you peel it away, revealing the white flesh underneath. You make your first cut and immediately your eyes start to burn. Here's a fun fact that nobody tells you about medieval cooking. You will cry. Not metaphorically, not emotionally, though also yes emotionally, but literally cry from onion exposure for hours at a time. The sulfuric compounds that onions release when cut, the same ones that make modern people tear up when chopping one onion for dinner, you're about to experience that times 100. In a poorly ventilated stone room, with smoke from the fires adding to the eye irritation. For basically the rest of the day, you start chopping, keeping one eye on the swan, developing a system. Mince onion, turn swan, mince onion, turn swan. Your eyes are streaming within minutes. Tears run down your cheeks, drip off your chin, sometimes fall directly into the pile of minced onions you're creating. You're essentially seasoning the food with your own tears, which feels like a metaphor for this entire job. The pile of minced onions grows. Your knife hand is cramping from the repetitive motion. The onion smell is so strong it's all you can taste, all you can smell. It's permeating your hair, your clothes, your skin. You'll smell like onions for days after this, no matter how much you wash. People will smell you coming before they see you. Agnes passes by with an armload of dough and pauses. "Bread trick," she says, and demonstrates by putting a small piece of bread between her teeth, letting it stick out of her mouth like some kind of edible cigar. Absorbs the onion fumes. Doesn't stop the tears, but helps with the throat burning. You try it, feeling ridiculous with bread sticking out of your mouth like a beaver, but she's right. It does help a little with the harsh feeling in your throat. You continue chopping, tears streaming, bread clenched in your teeth, turning a swan every few minutes. If someone painted this scene, it would be called Medieval Kitchen Still Life, suffering in 3 acts. About halfway through the first bushel, your hand slips. The knife skips across the onion and slices directly into your thumb. Not deep, not a disaster, but enough to bleed freely. You swear under your breath, grab a relatively clean rag, and wrap it tight around the cut. Blood seeps through the cloth immediately. You need to keep working because stopping means falling behind, and falling behind means William's wrath, which is worse than a little blood loss. So you continue chopping one-handed while you wait for the bleeding to slow, which is awkward and slower, but at least you're still productive. The rag around your thumb is getting soaked, turning from beige to dark red. You probably should get actual bandaging, maybe some cobwebs pressed into the wound, the medieval antiseptic of choice, which sounds insane but actually works because cobwebs contain natural antimicrobial properties. But there's no time. Eventually the bleeding slows enough that you can unwrap the rag, wipe away the blood, and see the cut. It's maybe an inch long, not deep enough to need stitching, which would be done with regular needle and thread, without anesthetic. While you bite down on a piece of leather and try not to scream, you rewrap it tighter and go back to two-handed chopping because you're behind schedule now and the pile of unminced onions is still obscenely large. The swan is browning nicely, the skin crisping up in a way that would be beautiful if you had any brain space left to appreciate beauty. You brush it with a mixture of butter and honey that William prepared earlier. The brush is a bundle of herbs tied together, basically a medieval basting brush, and it leaves a glossy coating that will help the skin crisp and add flavor. A quirky historical tidbit. Medieval cooks sometimes used feather brushes for basting, literally using feathers from birds to baste other birds, which is either poetic or horrifying depending on your perspective. You're using the herb bundle today, and it smells incredible: rosemary, thyme, and something else you can't quite identify mixing with the honey and butter. Your onion pile is growing, a small mountain of minced aromatics that will disappear into various dishes throughout the day. The pottage pot is bubbling over the cauldron hearth, a massive iron beast that holds probably 20 gallons of liquid and ingredients. Someone will add a portion of these onions to it, along with whatever vegetables are available, some barley or oats, maybe some of the meat scraps from the butchering, and it'll simmer all day, getting added to and eaten from and added to again in a continuous cycle that probably hasn't been completely emptied in weeks. Your second bushel of onions is about a quarter done when Jeffrey appears with a bowl of something green and leafy. Kale, he announces. 3 heads, stripped and chopped. Fine. You stare at him. You're covered in onion juice and blood and swan fat and tears. Your thumb is throbbing, your eyes are burning. You've been awake for 9 hours, and now he wants you to process 3 heads of kale, which, if you're not familiar with medieval kale, is not the delicate baby kale you find in modern salad mixes. This is massive, tough, fibrous kale that's been growing since autumn and has leaves like leather. Yes, sir. You say, because what else can you say? The kale gets dumped next to your onion station. Each head is roughly the size of your torso, with thick stems and leaves that need to be stripped off individually and then chopped into pieces small enough to become tender when cooked, which in medieval kale's case means pieces no larger than your thumbnail because anything bigger will remain chewy and unpleasant. You start with the stripping, grabbing the stem in one hand and running your other hand down it to tear off the leaves. The stems are so tough they could probably be used as walking sticks. Some of them are as thick as your thumb, your currently wounded, throbbing thumb, which makes this extra fun. The leaves come off with resistance, and soon you have a pile of stems, which go to the pig slop bucket because even medieval people won't eat kale stems, and a larger pile of leaves. The chopping is tedious work. Each leaf needs to be stacked, rolled, and sliced thin. Then the thin slices chopped perpendicular to create a confetti of kale. Your knife hand is really cramping now, the same muscles making the same motion hundreds of times. You're developing what's probably an early form of carpal tunnel syndrome, except medieval medicine doesn't have a name for that. They just call it cook's hand or something equally straightforward. Turn the swan, chop kale, mince onions. Try not to think about your throbbing thumb or burning eyes or aching shoulders or any of the dozen other ways your body is protesting this treatment. The rhythm becomes hypnotic in its misery. Historians still argue whether medieval servants developed coping mechanisms for repetitive labor or if they just suffered through it. You can confirm that you've definitely developed a mental escape technique where you sort of disconnect from your body and let your hands work on autopilot while your mind goes somewhere else entirely. Right now you're mentally at a beach you've never seen, based on a description you once heard from a traveling merchant. There's sand, supposedly, and water that's warm instead of freezing, and you can just lie there, not doing anything. Nobody demanding onions or swan rotation. Turnips next, someone says, and your beach fantasy evaporates. A basket of turnips appears. These are winter turnips, dug up from the ground where they've been stored under straw and dirt, and they're covered in soil that's frozen into clumps. They need to be scrubbed clean, peeled, and diced. You grab the first one and start scrubbing with a coarse brush, but the frozen dirt doesn't want to come off, so you have to dunk them in water first to soften the soil, which means more trips to the water barrel, more bending, more everything. The turnips are massive. Some of them are bigger than your fist, woody and tough from a full season of growth. They'll go into the pottage mainly, adding bulk and some sweetness, though calling turnip sweet is generous. They're less bitter than some vegetables, let's say that. You're peeling turnips, chopping kale, mincing onions, and turning the swan, and your brain is starting to fracture from the multitasking. Your hands are moving in different patterns, the rocking motion of mincing, the downward stroke of chopping, the rotational movement of peeling, the steady turn of the spit. You're like a really depressing juggler, except instead of juggling balls, you're juggling vegetables and a dead bird and your sanity. The kitchen around you is absolute chaos. Multiple dishes are being prepared simultaneously for the evening feast. Agnes is making pastry dough, her hands working butter into flour with a technique that looks effortless but you know from experience is incredibly tiring. Thomas is grinding spices in a mortar. You can hear the rhythmic thud of the pestle. The scullery maids are engaged in endless washing. Every pot, every cutting board, every knife gets used and dirted and needs to be cleaned and used again. Jeffrey is butchering one of the pigs into specific cuts. his cleaver making meaty thwacking sounds as it separates bone from joint. Robert has moved on to making sausages, forcing the ground meat mixture into the cleaned intestines you processed earlier, twisting them into links with practiced efficiency. William is everywhere and nowhere, appearing suddenly behind people to taste, critique, and occasionally strike. You hear him yell at someone for oversalting something, hear the smack of his hand across someone's head, hear the mumbled apology that follows. Your pile of prepped vegetables is growing, but so is the pile of things that still need prepping. For every onion you mince, someone brings 2 more. For every turnip you peel, 3 appear. It's like some kind of mythological punishment. Sisyphus pushing his boulder, Tantalus reaching for his fruit, you chopping vegetables that regenerate faster than you can process them. The swan needs basting again. You grab the herb brush, dip it in the butter-honey mixture, and paint the bird with careful strokes. The skin is a beautiful golden brown now, crispy and glistening. The smell is actually making you hungry, which is cruel because you know you won't taste this swan. This is noble food, and you're decidedly not noble. Your lunch, when you eventually get a break to eat it, will be some of that pottage, a chunk of dark bread, maybe some cheese if you're lucky. The nobles will eat swan, roasted pheasant, meat pies, delicate sauces, fresh white bread, imported wines, sugared fruits, and elaborate desserts. You'll eat boiled grain and vegetables and be grateful for it because at least it's food and at least you're eating. But that's later. Right now, there are still approximately 50 pounds of vegetables waiting to be processed. A swan that needs another 3 hours of rotating, fires that need constant attention, and a head cook who's looking for any excuse to make someone's life worse. You reach for another onion, your eyes already watering in anticipation, and you continue the work that will not end until you collapse into sleep tonight, only to wake up tomorrow and do it all again. The afternoon light has shifted, coming through the high windows at a different angle now, and you've achieved what you can only describe as a fugue state of vegetable processing. Your hands are moving automatically. Peel, chop, mince, turn the swan, repeat, while your conscious mind has essentially evacuated the premises. You're a meat puppet operated by muscle memory and fear of William's displeasure. Then you hear it, the sound that makes every servant in this kitchen simultaneously tense up like rabbits who've spotted a fox. Footsteps. Not just any footsteps, but the particular cadence of expensive leather boots on stone, the confident stride of someone who owns things. Noble footsteps. William's voice cuts through the kitchen noise like a cleaver through flesh. Stand straight. Eyes down, mouths shut. Everyone freezes in place. You drop the turnip you were holding, wipe your hands on your already filthy tunic, and stand as straight as your exhausted spine will allow. Your eyes go to the floor. Not the ceiling, not the walls, definitely not to the noble's face. Making eye contact with nobility is presumptuous at best, grounds for punishment at worst. Lord Edmund enters the kitchen with his steward, a pinch-faced man named Harold who carries a wax tablet and looks perpetually disappointed with everything. The Lord himself is dressed in clothing that probably costs more than you'll earn in your entire lifetime. Fine will dyed a deep blue, expensive. Fur trim, very expensive. And actual buttons made of silver, obscenely expensive. He's maybe 40, well-fed in the way that only the wealthy can be, with the kind of soft hands that have never hauled water or minced onions. The swan for tonight's feast, Lord Edmund says, and William immediately jumps to attention like a trained dog. Yes, my lord, roasting perfectly, my lord, will be ready precisely when you require it, my lord. William gushes, and there's something almost pathetic about seeing this man who terrifies you daily now scraping and bowing before someone even higher on the food chain. Lord Edmund walks toward your station, where you're covered in vegetable matter and blood and tears and shame. You keep your eyes on the floor, watching his expensive boots approach, and you try to make yourself smaller, less noticeable, invisible if possible. "This is the bird?" he asks, and you realize with mounting horror that he's addressing you. "Why, yes, my lord." You stammer, because not answering would be disrespectful, but you keep your eyes down because looking up would also be disrespectful. Medieval etiquette is a minefield designed to catch you failing. "It's browning unevenly," he observes, and your stomach drops through the floor. My deepest apologies, my lord. I'll correct it immediately, my lord. You babble, reaching for the spit to rotate the swan, to fix the unevenness that you honestly cannot see, but if he says it's there, then it must be there because nobles are always right. That's literally the social structure. See that you do, he says, and then he's moving on, inspecting other stations, pointing at things, making comments that send cooks and servants scrambling to adjust whatever has displeased his noble sensibilities. The moment he's gone, William is on you like a hunting hawk on a mouse. His hand catches you across the ear. Not hard enough to do real damage, but hard enough to make your head ring and your eyes water fresh tears that have nothing to do with onions. Uneven browning, he hisses, his face so close to yours you can smell the beer on his breath. You embarrass me in front of the Lord with your incompetence? I'm sorry, sir. I'll do better, sir. You gasp, holding your stinging ear. You'll do perfect or you'll find yourself mucking the stables. Understand? Yes, sir. Perfect, sir. He stalks away, and you're left shaking, ear throbbing, the threat hanging in the air. And here's the thing, the browning wasn't uneven. You've been watching that swan like your life depends on it, because it kind of does, rotating it religiously, maintaining consistent heat. But the Lord said it was uneven, so now it's historical fact that it was uneven, and you've been beaten for your failure to achieve something you were actually achieving. This is the hierarchy in action. The Lord has absolute authority over his household. William has authority over the kitchen. You have authority over basically nothing except maybe the kitchen cat, and even that's debatable because the cat doesn't listen to anyone. And the whole system is enforced through violence, casual, accepted, expected violence. You check the swan obsessively now, rotating it more frequently, adjusting its position, trying to achieve a level of perfection that will satisfy both the Lord's expectations and William's anger. Your hands are shaking slightly from the adrenaline and fear. Geoffrey appears with more work. Bread trenchers, he says, dumping a basket of day-old bread loaves on your station. Cut them flat, ready for the feast. 100 of them. Trenchers are the medieval version of plates, thick slices of stale bread that serve as both plate and food. The nobles eat their meal on top of the trencher, which absorbs the juices and gravies, and then the used trenchers get distributed to the poor as alms. It's efficient in a way, no dishes to wash, and you're technically doing charity, but it also means you need a lot of bread slices cut to precise specifications. You grab the first loaf and start slicing. The bread is hard enough that it takes real pressure to cut through, and your knife hand, already fatigued from hours of chopping, protests immediately. Each loaf needs to yield 4 trenchers, cut horizontally to create flat platforms. The slices need to be even thickness, too thin and they'll fall apart when food is placed on them, too thick and the nobles will complain about excessive bread. You're cutting trenchers, monitoring the swan, and trying not to think about your throbbing ear or the fundamental unfairness of a system where you can be beaten for imaginary infractions. Around you, the kitchen hierarchy is playing out in a dozen small interactions. William yells at Geoffrey about something. Geoffrey turns and yells at Thomas. Thomas, having no one below him to yell at, just absorbs the abuse and works faster. Agnes, being older and more experienced, exists in a slightly protected bubble where she gets yelled at less, but you've seen William strike her when she makes mistakes. The scullery maids are at the absolute bottom of the hierarchy. They're younger than you, probably 13 or 14, and they do the jobs nobody else wants. Washing pots with lye that burns their hands, scrubbing floors on their knees, hauling slops to the pig pen. You hear one of them crying softly in the corner after William threw a spoon at her for being too slow with the pot washing. The spoon left a welt on her forehead that's already swelling. Nobody comforts her. There's no time for comfort. She'll cry while working, wipe her tears on her sleeve, and continue scrubbing because stopping means more punishment. This is what modern people don't understand about medieval life. It's not just the hard work or the long hours or the primitive conditions. It's the constant, grinding degradation. You're not a person with rights or dignity. You're a tool that talks, and tools that don't perform get hit until they work better or break completely. A quirky historical note. Some medieval kitchens had official positions called tasters, whose job was to taste the Lord's food before serving to ensure it wasn't poisoned. This sounds like a cushy job, eating noble food before anyone else, until you realize you're literally a human poison detector. and if someone has poisoned the food, you die. It's the medieval version of hazard pay, except the pay is just you get to keep living if the food is safe. Your kitchen doesn't have a dedicated taster because Lord Edmund is either too cheap or too trusting, but William always tastes everything before it goes upstairs, and you've seen him spit out food that's too salty, too bland, too hot, too cold, and then distribute beatings based on whoever made the offending dish. You're about halfway through the trench you're cutting when you notice something wrong with the swan. There's a smell. Not the good smell of roasting meat, but something sharper, more acrid. You look closer and realize with horror that some of the dripping fat has caused a flare-up that's charring one side of the bird. You frantically rotate the swan away from the hot spot, but the damage is done. There's a dark patch on the skin, unmistakably burnt. Your heart is hammering. This is a disaster. The centerpiece of tonight's feast, the bird that Lord Edmund personally inspected, now has a charred section that any idiot could spot. You could hide it. Turn the burnt side toward the wall when it's presented. Hope nobody notices in the dim lighting of the great hall. But if they do notice, and if it's traced back to you, the punishment will be severe. Or you could confess now to William, take your beating, and let him decide how to handle it. Neither option is good. You stand there, paralyzed by indecision, the swan slowly rotating, the burnt patch mocking you with every turn. The kitchen chaos continues around you. Nobody has noticed yet because everyone is buried in their own tasks, their own small crises. Then Agnes is beside you, her voice low. Honey paste, she whispers. Mix honey with a bit of wine, brush it thick over the burnt part, let it caramelize. Hides the char, adds flavor. Quick, before William sees. You could kiss her. Instead you nod frantically and grab a bowl, mixing honey and wine into a thick paste. Your hands are shaking as you brush it over the burnt section. One thick layer, then another, building up coverage. The honey glistens and starts to bubble in the heat, turning golden, camouflaging the char underneath. It's not perfect. Close inspection would reveal the cover-up. But in the flickering candlelight of the great hall, with nobles already deep in their wine, it might pass unnoticed. Thank you. You breathe to Agnes, and she just nods and moves away, back to her own station, her own work. That moment of kindness, of solidarity, is rare enough that it almost makes you emotional. But there's no time for emotions because Geoffrey is approaching with another basket. Leeks, he announces, cleaned and chopped, for the soup course. Leeks are a nightmare to clean because dirt gets trapped between the layers, and if you don't clean them thoroughly, someone bites into gritty leek soup and you get blamed for it. Each leek needs to be split lengthwise, fanned open under running water, more water hauling, inevitably, and checked for dirt between every single layer. You're cutting trenchers, monitoring your honey camouflage swan, and now cleaning leeks, and your brain is definitely fracturing under the cognitive load. Medieval multitasking is not a skill they teach. You just develop it through desperation and the fear of beatings. The afternoon is wearing on. Your feet, which you stopped being able to feel around hour 8, have progressed beyond numbness into a special realm of pain where every step sends shooting sensations up your legs. Your back is one continuous ache from the bending, lifting, and standing. Your hands are a collection of cuts, burns, and blisters at various stages of healing and re-injury. And through it all, the social hierarchy presses down like a physical weight. You're hyper-aware of your place, of the need to be deferential, to anticipate needs before they're stated, to absorb abuse without complaint. When William walks by, you instinctively make yourself smaller. When Geoffrey barks an order, you jump to comply immediately. Historians still argue whether medieval servants internalized this hierarchy, believing themselves genuinely inferior, or whether they maintained internal resistance while performing external submission. You can't answer that for everyone, but you can say that right now, covered in vegetable scraps and swan grease, ears still throbbing from William's blow, you feel less like a person and more like a particularly unreliable piece of kitchen equipment. A crash from across the kitchen. Thomas has dropped a pot, and it's rolled across the floor, spilling whatever was in it. William descends on him immediately, and you hear the thud of fist meeting flesh, hear Thomas's cry of pain, hear William roaring about waste and incompetence. You keep your head down, keep working, and hope desperately that you make it through the rest of this day without similar punishment. The swan rotates. The vegetables pile up. Your hands move in their endless, mindless patterns. And somewhere above you, in comfortable rooms with tapestries and fireplaces and soft beds, the nobles who will eat this swan are probably napping or playing chess or doing whatever wealthy people do with their abundant free time, completely unaware of and unconcerned with the small suffering required to feed them. The late afternoon sun is slanting through the windows in that golden way that would be beautiful if you weren't about to enter what you privately call feast hell. Those hours when a normal dinner service transforms into a theatrical production requiring the labor intensity of building a cathedral and the precision of performing surgery. Except if you mess up surgery, the patient dies, and if you mess up a feast, you just wish you were dead. William is in full tyrant mode now, stalking through the kitchen with a wooden spoon the size of a small club, which he uses both for tasting and for striking anyone who displeases him. His face has achieved a shade of red that suggests his blood pressure is approaching dangerous levels. But he'll probably outlive you through sheer spite. Listen up, he bellows, and the entire kitchen falls silent except for the crackling fires and bubbling pots. Lord Edmund's brother is here, from court, with his wife, and their expectations are high, which means our execution must be perfect. Your stomach sinks. Lord Edmund's brother means higher nobility, which means more courses, more elaborate presentations, more opportunities for everything to go catastrophically wrong. William continues his briefing like a general preparing troops for battle. 7 courses. 7. We're doing the full royal progression. So telt between the 3rd and 4th course, that's your domain, Agnes, and it better be spectacular. Swan is the centerpiece of course 4, and if there's any imperfection, heads will roll. Metaphorically, possibly literally, I haven't decided yet. You glance nervously at your honey-covered burnt patch on the swan and pray to several saints you're not entirely sure you believe in. The schedule, William says, and Jeffrey unfurls a piece of parchment with the timeline written in ink that probably cost more than your monthly wages, which are essentially nothing, but still. First course serves at the 7th bell, courses every half hour after, which means we have. He checks the light through the windows. Approximately 2 hours to complete preparations that should take 4 hours. So move. The kitchen explodes into coordinated chaos. This is where the military precision of a medieval kitchen really shows. Everyone has their assigned tasks, their stations, their responsibilities, and despite the insanity and abuse, there's a rhythm to it that's almost beautiful when viewed from a distance, though not beautiful at all when you're living it. Your responsibilities, as near as you can determine from the barked orders flying around, are: finish the swan, obviously, prepare the garnishes for the swan presentation, assist with the sautelt, the elaborate sugar sculpture that will be paraded between courses, and somehow also continue maintaining all 4 fires at their precise temperatures because apparently you've developed the ability to be in multiple places simultaneously through pure anxiety. The sautelt, and this is where medieval feasting gets absolutely unhinged, is going to be a castle. A miniature castle made from sugar, marzipan, and architectural ambition. Agnes has been working on it for days, and it's actually impressive. Tiny sugar towers with marzipan flags, walls made from molded sugar paste, even little fondant knights standing guard. It's art. It's engineering. It's completely edible. And it's absolutely going to give every noble who eats it a sugar rush that will make them even more insufferable than usual. But the sautelt isn't finished. The final tower needs assembly, the flags need painting with food dyes, and the whole thing needs to be mounted on a presentation board and decorated with additional sugar work to make it look like it's sitting in a landscape. This is your job now, apparently, in addition to everything else. You wash your hands as thoroughly as possible. Sugar work requires clean hands because any grease or debris will ruin the delicate construction. And approach Agnes's station where the sautelt pieces are laid out like the world's most fragile puzzle. Gum Arabic paste, Agnes says, handing you a small pot of sticky substance that acts as medieval edible glue. Apply to the base of the tower, press down firmly but gently, hold for a count of 20. If it collapses, William will use your skull as a soup bowl. You're pretty sure she's exaggerating. Pretty sure. You take the delicate sugar tower. It's maybe 6 inches tall, hollow, incredibly fragile, and apply the gum Arabic with shaking hands. Your fingers, which have been chopping vegetables and rotating swans all day, suddenly need to perform microsurgery on sugar architecture. You press the tower onto the castle base, feeling it settle into place, and you count. 1, 2, 3. The tower wobbles slightly. Your heart stops. 4, 5, 6. It stabilizes. You keep counting, keep holding, barely breathing. 20. You let go. The tower stands. You've successfully assembled 1/4 of the final touches on an edible castle, and you feel a completely disproportionate sense of achievement. But there's no time to celebrate because the swan needs its final preparations, and this is where things get truly medieval banquet insane. The swan, you see, can't just be served as roasted meat on a platter. That would be too simple, too boring, too lacking in the ostentatious display of wealth that medieval nobility craves like oxygen. No, the swan needs to be redressed in its feathers. Let me explain this culinary madness. Someone, in this case, Thomas, carefully plucked the swan before roasting, keeping the skin with attached feathers intact in large sections. Now that the swan is cooked, you're going to use small wooden skewers and wire to reattach these feather sections to the cooked bird, making it look like a living swan that just happens to be roasted and dead. It's taxidermy meets cooking meets some kind of elaborate medieval prank on the concept of food presentation. The feather sections are laid out on a table, and they still smell faintly of raw bird despite being separated from the swan for hours. You start with the neck section. The long, elegant white neck feathers need to drape naturally, covering the part where you skewered the bird onto the spit. You use tiny pins, basically medieval straight pins made from bone, to attach the skin to the cooked flesh, positioning feathers to hide the construction. This painstaking work. Each feather section needs to overlap the next naturally, creating the illusion of a complete bird. The wings are particularly challenging. They need to be positioned as if the swan is in mid-landing or displaying, wings partially spread in that graceful curve that swans do. A quirky historical fact. Some medieval feasts featured even more elaborate presentations, like pies that had live birds inside that would fly out when the pie was cut. You know the nursery rhyme, 4 and 20 blackbirds baked in a pie? That was actually based on a real medieval practice. They'd bake an empty pie crust, then insert a cage of live birds through a hole in the bottom before serving. Wasn't that a dainty dish to set before the king line takes on a whole new meaning when you realize people were actually doing this? Your kitchen isn't that elaborate, thank God, because you're pretty sure trying to wrangle live birds while also managing everything else would be the thing that finally breaks you. The swan is coming together. Feathers attached, positioned to hide the honey-covered burn spot. You're strategic about this, placing the fullest, most attractive feathers on that side, and the overall effect is actually kind of magnificent. It looks like a sleeping swan, or maybe a swan that's just very relaxed about being dead and cooked. The long neck curves gracefully. The wings arch in that perfect swan curve. Gold leaf, William says, appearing behind you with a small book of gold leaf. Actual gold, hammered so thin it's translucent, used to decorate food because medieval nobility literally eats gold to show they can afford to eat gold. You've done this before, but it never stops being nerve-wracking. Gold leaf is so delicate that breathing on it wrong will make it crumple or blow away. You need to use a soft brush to transfer tiny pieces from the book to the swan, applying them to the tips of feathers, the beak, anywhere that will catch light and scream. We are so wealthy we put gold on our food. Your hands are steady despite the exhaustion. You've entered that state beyond tired where everything feels slightly unreal and your body is just going through motions. You brush gold onto feather tips, onto the curve of the neck, a bit on the beak. The swan is transforming into something that belongs in a painting, not a kitchen. While you're doing this delicate gold application, you're also supposed to be monitoring the other dishes in various stages of completion. There's a venison roast that needs basting. There's a fish course, because it's technically Friday and the church has opinions about meat consumption, that's being prepared in a special sauce made with almonds and wine. There are meat pies with elaborate lattice tops. There are vegetable dishes that have been so heavily spiced and sauced they're barely recognizable as vegetables. And then there are the subtleties, the smaller decorative food items that will accompany each course. Carved vegetable flowers, jellies molded into shapes, fruits arranged in elaborate patterns. Every plate needs to be art, needs to demonstrate not just wealth but sophistication. taste, cultural refinement. Jeffrey is preparing the peacock for course 5. Yes, peacock, because apparently swan isn't fancy enough and we need multiple decorative birds. The peacock will get similar feather treatment, but peacock feathers are even more elaborate with those iridescent eye spots that nobles love. Thomas is working on something involving eels, and you deliberately don't look too closely because eels are nightmare creatures and watching them being prepared is disturbing even by medieval kitchen standards. The scullery maids are washing dishes in a continuous cycle. Plates used for prep get washed and immediately reused for more prep. An endless loop of scrubbing with lye and sand and cold water that's turning their hands red and raw. Agnes has finished the sautelt and it's genuinely spectacular. A sugar castle complete with tiny marzipan trees around the base, gold-dusted towers, even a little sugar moat. Probably represents a week's worth of a common laborer's wages and materials alone, and it'll be demolished and eaten in about 15 minutes, which feels like a metaphor for something but you're too tired to figure out what. The 7th bell rings. You can hear it through the stone walls, the deep resonant tone that marks the hour. First course needs to go up in minutes. William is everywhere, tasting, adjusting, barking orders. A sauce is too thin, someone's frantically whisking in breadcrumbs to thicken it. A pie crust is too pale, it gets brushed with egg wash and thrust back into the oven. Everything is controlled chaos. A culinary ballet performed by exhausted dancers who no one wrong step means violence. The first course platters are assembled. Delicate soups in silver bowls, small savory pastries, candied fruits, wine already poured into goblets. Serving men appear, a different class of servant, these ones who interact with nobility directly and thus are better dressed, better groomed, better everything than you kitchen servants. They load the platters onto their arms with practiced ease and disappear through the door that leads to the great hall, carrying the first wave of tonight's elaborate meal. You hear the faint sound of music starting up. There are musicians entertaining during the feast, because of course there are, because every sense must be indulged simultaneously. You have maybe 25 minutes before course 2 goes up, and you use that time to frantically prepare garnishes, check fires, help Agnes with last-minute adjustments to the sautelt, and generally exist in a state of controlled panic. Course 2 goes up, fish in elaborate sauce, more pies, some kind of jellied thing that wobbles in a way that's probably elegant but looks disturbing. Course 3 follows, the venison roast, properly carved and arranged, surrounded by vegetable subtleties. Then the sautelt makes its grand procession. It's carried by 2 serving men on a special board, and you watch it disappear through the door, knowing that upstairs, nobles are probably gasping and applauding at the sugar castle while you're down here, covered in swan grease and gold leaf fragments, wondering if your feet will ever feel normal again. Course 4 is your moment. The swan, fully assembled, fully golden, magnificent and grotesque in equal measure, gets mounted on the largest presentation platter. Around it you arrange the garnishes you've prepared, roasted vegetables, sauce boats, carved radish roses, everything positioned to enhance the swan's glory. William inspects it with the intensity of a general reviewing troops. He circles the platter 3 times, examining every angle. His face is unreadable. Your heart is hammering. Acceptable, he finally says, which is the highest praise he gives. The swan goes up to the great hall, and you feel a wave of relief so intense you actually sway slightly on your feet. You did it. The centerpiece is served. You haven't been beaten recently. The worst is over. Except it's not over, because there are still 3 more courses to prepare and serve, and the kitchen still needs to be cleaned afterward, and you still have hours of work ahead of you. But for just this moment, watching your honey-camouflaged, gold-leafed, re-feathered swan disappear into the noble dining room, you feel something that might be pride. Then William throws a pot at someone for overcooking something, and you're back to reality. The feast is winding down upstairs. You can hear the muffled sounds of laughter, music, the occasional crash of something being knocked over because nobles several courses deep into wine-soaked revelry tend toward the clumsy side. Down here in the kitchen, you're experiencing what you've come to think of as the post-feast crash, where adrenaline runs out and your body suddenly remembers it's been working for 17 hours straight on minimal food and sleep. But there's no rest yet. The kitchen is a disaster zone of epic proportions. Every surface covered in food debris, dirty pots stacked in precarious towers, grease coating the floor in slick patches that make walking treacherous. The fires still need tending because some nobles will want late-night snacks or warm wine, and God forbid the nobility goes 10 minutes without someone catering to their needs. You're at the washing tubs, helping the scullery maids with the mountain of dishes because everyone capable of holding a scrub brush has been drafted into cleaning duty. The water is cold. The hot water ran out an hour ago, and the lye soap burns your cracked, cut hands with every plunge into the gray, greasy water. Agnes is beside you, mechanically scrubbing a roasting pan that's crusted with burnt bits and fat. "Get behind the ears," she mutters, and you realize she's not talking about the pan. She's reminding you to wash behind your ears before bed because the head lice have been making rounds through the servants' quarters again, and personal hygiene is one of the few defenses you have against them. The head lice situation is actually worse than it sounds. In the medieval world, basically everyone has lice: nobility, clergy, servants, everyone. The difference is that nobles can afford regular bathing, clean clothes, and servants to pick the lice out of their hair. You get communal sleeping quarters with unchanged straw bedding and maybe one full wash per month if you're lucky. Thomas stumbles past carrying a stack of plates that wobbles dangerously. He's got a black eye forming from where William hit him earlier, and he's moving with the careful stiffness of someone who's discovered new and exciting locations for bruises. He doesn't complain though. Nobody complains. Complaining is a luxury for people who have recourse, and you have none. You're scrubbing a pot, one of the massive iron cauldrons that needs 2 people to lift when full, when you feel a sharp pain in your hand. You pull it out of the water and see a deep cut across your palm, probably from a knife someone left in the washing tub. Blood wells up immediately, mixing with the dirty dishwater in a way that would horrify any modern health inspector. "Cloth," Agnes says, already moving, and she wraps your hand with a relatively clean rag, tying it tight. "Press hard. Cobwebs if it doesn't stop." The cobweb thing sounds insane, but it actually works. Cobwebs have natural coagulating properties and mild antimicrobial effects. This medieval first aid, and while it won't win any medical awards, it's better than nothing. You press the cloth against your palm and continue washing one-handed because stopping means falling further behind, and falling behind means you'll be here even later. The cut throbs in time with your heartbeat. You're mentally cataloging your injuries from today. Bruised hip from falling on the path twice, cut thumb from onion chopping, various burns from fire and hot water, the ear that William boxed, now this palm cut, plus the general full-body ache from 17 hours of continuous labor. You're basically a mobile collection of damage, held together by exhaustion and the desperate need to keep working. A crash from across the kitchen. One of the scullery maids has dropped a stack of bowls. They shatter across the stone floor in an explosion of ceramic shards. The girl, she can't be more than 13, immediately starts crying. Not just because she's in trouble, but probably because she's been working since before dawn and her body and mind are both at breaking point. Jeffrey appears instantly, his face contorted with rage. Clumsy little, and his hand is rising, and you see the trajectory, you know what's coming. "I'll clean it," you hear yourself saying, stepping forward even though every fiber of your being is screaming to stay invisible. "My fault, sir. I stacked them too high, sir. She was just carrying what I gave her." It's a lie. Everyone knows it's a lie. But you're offering Jeffrey a target that's not a crying child, and after a moment of calculation, he takes it. His fist catches you in the ribs. Not full force, but enough to knock the wind out of you and send a sharp pain radiating through your chest. "Clean it up then," he snarls and stalks away. You stand there, trying to breathe through the rib pain, and the scullery maid is looking at you with something like worship mixed with horror. You just shake your head and start picking up broken ceramic. Because what else are you going to do? Let a child get beaten when you can take the hit instead? You've already got a dozen injuries, what's one more? The ceramic shards are sharp, and several of them slice your fingers as you gather them. Your hands are becoming more cut than uncut at this point. Blood mixes with dishwater mixes with food debris on the floor, and you're too tired to even feel disgusted by it. A quirky and deeply disturbing historical fact. Medieval kitchens were breeding grounds for food poisoning and disease, but people didn't make the connection between hygiene and illness. The germ theory of disease won't be discovered for several more centuries. So you've got raw meat being prepared on the same surfaces as ready-to-eat foods, no refrigeration, flies everywhere, blood and viscera on every surface, and people are just fine with it. Well, not fine, people get sick and die from food poisoning all the time, but they attribute it to bad humors or gods, well, rather than the fact that you're preparing food in conditions that would make a modern health inspector weep blood. You've seen it happen. Last year, a batch of bad meat made it into the servants' pottage, and half the kitchen staff was violently ill for days. 3 people died, 2 scullery maids and one of the stable boys who sometimes helped with food prep. They were just gone. Buried in unmarked graves outside the castle walls, replaced with new servants within a week, their names forgotten almost immediately. That's another thing modern people don't understand about medieval life. Death is constant and casual. People die from infections that modern antibiotics would cure in days. They die from minor injuries that get infected. They die from diseases that spread through crowded, unsanitary living conditions. They die young, and their deaths are accepted as the natural order of things. You're scooping the last of the ceramic shards into a bucket when you notice something wrong. Your vision is doing this weird thing where it tunnels, going dark around the edges. The kitchen sounds become distant and muffled. Your hands are shaking uncontrollably. Sit, Agnes says firmly, and guides you to a stool before you fall over. Head between knees. Breathe. You follow her instructions, and gradually the world comes back into focus. You've been running on adrenaline and determination for so long that your body is starting to simply shut down, and it's choosing really inconvenient moments to remind you that you're human and humans have limits. Eat, Agnes says, pressing a chunk of bread into your hand. It's from the trenchers, used as plates during the feast, soaked with meat juices and sauces, probably dropped on the floor at some point. It's the most delicious thing you've tasted in weeks. You devour it in 3 bites, barely chewing, and feel a tiny surge of energy from the actual food entering your system. When did you last eat? Breakfast was. You can't actually remember breakfast. There might have been some porridge around dawn, or was that yesterday? The days blur together into one continuous cycle of work-sleep-work. William is doing his final inspection now, walking through the kitchen with his critical eye scanning every surface. He points at a pot that hasn't been scrubbed to his satisfaction. Back into the wash water it goes. He spots a cutting board with a stain. Someone gets cuffed for inadequate cleaning. He finds a corner where grease has been inadequately mopped. You watch as he makes Thomas get on hands and knees and scrub it again with lye until the skin on his hands is raw. This is the reality of kitchen hierarchy. The work is never done enough, never clean enough, never perfect enough. There's always something to criticize, always an excuse for punishment, always a way to assert dominance and control. The final cleaning takes another hour. By the time William finally dismisses you, not with praise or thanks, just a grunt and a wave of his hand. You've been awake for 19 hours and working for all but maybe 30 minutes of that time. You stumble toward the servants' quarters, your feet barely lifting off the ground in something that's more shuffle than walk. The corridor is dark. The torches have burned low, and you navigate by memory and touch, one hand on the wall for balance. The sleeping quarters are already full of snoring servants. You find your pallet, the same flat, scratchy straw mattress you left this morning, which feels like a lifetime ago, and collapse onto it fully clothed. You should probably wash. You definitely smell like a combination of onions, blood, swan grease, and would smoke. But moving sounds impossible, and sleep is already pulling you under like a dark tide. Your last conscious thoughts are a jumbled mess. Did you bank the fires properly? Is tomorrow a slaughter day? Does your palm cut need proper bandaging? When did you last? And then you're gone, falling into the kind of deep, dreamless sleep that comes from complete physical and mental exhaustion. Your body immediately begins the inadequate process of healing and recovering from today's damage, knowing it has maybe 4 or 5 hours before the rooster crows and the whole nightmare begins again. Somewhere in the castle above you, nobles are probably still awake, digesting their 7-course feast, maybe playing games or listening to poetry or engaging in courtly romance. They'll sleep in tomorrow, wake to a leisurely breakfast brought to them in bed, spend their day doing whatever nobles do, hunting, hawking, needlework, political scheming. You'll wake at 3 a.m. to light fires. and the day after that, and the day after that, in an endless cycle that will continue until your body breaks or until you die, whichever comes first. Medieval life expectancy for the lower classes is roughly 40 years, and most kitchen servants don't make it that far. The constant injuries, the poor nutrition, the exposure to fire and heat and disease, all of it adds up. But that's tomorrow's problem. Tonight you sleep, at least until the coughing starts. That wet, rattling cough from a few pallets over that's been getting worse. The one everyone's pretending not to notice because acknowledging it means acknowledging that plague or consumption or any number of deadly illnesses might be spreading through your cramped quarters. You pull your thin blanket over your head and try to block out the sound. Your cut palm throbs. Your bruised ribs ache with each breath. Your shoulders feel like they've been beaten with hammers. And tomorrow you'll do it all again. The reality you wake up to every morning. The reality that's hitting you especially hard right now as you lie on your straw pallet in the pre-dawn darkness, is that there is no escape from this life. None. And that's the part that modern people, comfortable in their world of career changes and upward mobility and follow your dreams motivational posters, simply cannot comprehend. You're not going to save up money and open your own business. You're not going to get discovered for your hidden talents and promoted to a better position. You're not going to marry rich and escape this drudgery. Those are fairy tales, and you're living in the brutal, mundane reality underneath the fairy tale veneer. Let's talk about the economics, because that's where the trap really reveals itself. Your wages, and I use that term loosely, are essentially room and board plus maybe a few pennies per year if you're lucky. Those pennies, in case you're wondering, buy you approximately nothing. A loaf of bread costs a halfpenny. A pair of shoes costs several weeks' worth of your annual wages. A chicken costs more than you'll see in cash in 6 months. But surely you could save up over years? Except no, because there's a medieval economic concept that's specifically designed to keep you exactly where you are. Debt bondage. You owe money to the Lord for your housing, for your food, for the candles you burn, even though you're barely allowed candles, for the tools you use, for the uniform you wear, for basically existing in the Lord's household and consuming his resources. The math is designed so you're always slightly in debt. Not catastrophically in debt. That would be inefficient because then you might run away or die. Just enough in debt that leaving is impossible because where would you go? You can't work elsewhere while owing money to your current Lord. And even if you could run away, there's a whole legal framework designed to prevent exactly that. Because here's the fun part, you're not exactly a slave, but you're not exactly free either. If you're a serf, and many kitchen servants are tied to the land as serfs, you legally cannot leave the Lord's estate without permission. That's the law. If you run away, you're a fugitive, and if you're caught, the punishment ranges from beating to mutilation to death, depending on how vindictive your Lord is feeling. Even if you're not technically a serf, you're bound by contracts and debts and social structures that might as well be chains. Where would you go? To another castle where the conditions would be exactly the same. To a city where you have no guild membership and no way to earn a living. To the wilderness where you'd probably starve or freeze or get eaten by wolves within a week. The medieval world is not set up for social mobility. It's specifically designed to keep everyone in their designated place. The nobility stays noble. The clergy stays clerical. The peasants and servants stay peasant Y and servant Y. That's the order God intended, according to the church, and disrupting that order is basically heresy. You're lying here in the darkness, and you can hear the beginning sounds of the castle waking up. The rooster that serves as everyone's alarm clock is starting his obnoxious crowing. Someone a few pallets over is groaning as they force themselves upright. Your body is screaming at you to stay down, to rest, to recover from yesterday's damage. But your brain knows that staying in bed means punishment, means more beatings, means making your already miserable existence even worse. So you sit up, wincing as every injury from yesterday announces itself. Your palm cut has bled through the bandage and stuck to the fabric. Your bruised ribs protest with sharp pains when you breathe too deeply. Your shoulders are so stiff you can barely raise your arms above your head. This is your life. This is every day. And it will continue being your life until something breaks. Either the social structure, unlikely, or your body, very likely. A quirky and depressing historical fact. Medieval people were very aware of their trapped circumstances, and they expressed it through their folk songs and stories. Many medieval ballads are about servants or peasants who escape their terrible lives through magic or luck or divine intervention. Their fantasies, wish fulfillment, the medieval equivalent of lottery dreams. Real life doesn't have fairy godmothers or magic beans or convenient inheritances. Real life has William the Red screaming at you to move faster while you've been awake for 3 minutes. You stumble through your morning routine, such as it is. There's a communal bucket of water for washing your face and hands. The water is cold enough to make your teeth chatter, and there are already floating bits of who knows what from the dozen people who used it before you. You splash some on your face anyway because the alternative is going unwashed, and even medieval people have some standards. Your clothes are the same ones you wore yesterday. You own exactly one change of clothing, and it's currently being washed, which means it's soaking in a barrel of cold water and lye, and you'll wear it next week when this set becomes completely unbearable. Medieval laundry is not a daily occurrence. It's a weekly or monthly event that requires heating massive amounts of water and beating clothes against rocks or washboards, and nobody has time for that when there are fires to light and swans to rotate. You make your way to the kitchen, and the sight that greets you is grimly familiar. The fires are dead. Of course they are. You were too exhausted last night to bank them properly, and now you'll pay for that oversight with extra time getting them restarted. The kitchen is cold. The stone walls radiating chill like they've stored up all of winter and are releasing it specifically to make your morning worse. You go through the fire lighting ritual again. Tinderbox, charcloth, flint, steel, strike, 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 catch the spark, blow gently, add kindling. Your hands are so damaged from yesterday that holding the flint hurts, but you push through because pain is just another constant in your life, like hunger or exhaustion or the knowledge that today will be exactly as terrible as yesterday. The first fire catches, then the second, and you're working on the third when Agnes arrives. She looks as bad as you feel, dark circles under her eyes, moving with the stiffness of someone whose body has been used as a punching bag by labor. She's probably in her early 30s, but she looks 50, and that's the reality of this work. It ages you at triple speed. Heard you took Jeffrey's hit for little Mary last night, she says quietly, checking that no one else is in earshot. You shrug, which makes your bruised ribs protest. She's just a kid. She won't always be, Agnes says, and there's something dark in her tone. This place eats kids and spits out people like us. You think you're helping, but you're just delaying the inevitable. It's the most cynical thing you've ever heard Agnes say, and it hits you like cold water because she's probably right. Mary will either break under the abuse and leave to go where? Or she'll become hardened like you and Agnes, or she'll die from injury or illness or exhaustion. Those are the 3 options. There is no 4th option where she escapes to a better life. Historians still argue whether medieval people were fatalistic because of their circumstances or whether their religious beliefs made them accept suffering as divinely ordained. You can answer that from personal experience. It's both. You accept this life because there's no alternative, and you tell yourself it's God's will because the alternative is acknowledging that you're trapped in a system designed to exploit you until you're used up and discarded. The day unfolds with the familiar terrible rhythm. Water hauling, your shoulders scream in protest, but you haul anyway because the water doesn't care about your pain. Vegetable chopping, your cut palm reopens with the first few cuts, but you wrap it tighter and continue because meals need making. Fire tending, you stand in front of heat that would make a modern person pass out from heat exhaustion, and you just endure it because that's what you do. William is in rare form today, possibly because he's hungover from sampling too much of last night's wine. He's bellowing about incompetence, about low standards, about how if we all just worked harder everything would be perfect. It's the medieval version of the beatings will continue until morale improves. Except morale isn't really a consideration, only output matters. Around mid-morning, you witness something that crystallizes the whole awful system. One of the stable boys, a kid named Peter, maybe 14, appears in the kitchen looking for scraps to feed the dogs. Jeffrey sees him and immediately starts shouting about unauthorized personnel in the kitchen, about stealing, about disrespect. Peter tries to explain, he's just doing his job, the kennels need feeding, he was told to get scraps. But Jeffrey is already escalating. He grabs Peter by the collar and drags him to William, declaring that the boy was trying to steal food. William doesn't ask questions. He doesn't investigate. He just accepts Jeffrey's word as truth and backhands Peter so hard the kid's head snaps to the side. Then he kicks Peter toward the door, telling him to get out and never come back without explicit permission. Peter leaves, crying, probably with a broken tooth or split lip, and he'll go back to the stables and get beaten there too for failing to get the dog food, and nobody will think this is unusual or wrong or even particularly noteworthy. That's the system. Authority is always right. Those below authority are always wrong. Violence maintains the hierarchy. Questioning is insubordination. Survival means accepting abuse and hoping you're not singled out for the worst of it. You're chopping onions again, because apparently there's a never-ending supply of onions in the world and all of them need to be minced. When you have a moment of clarity that's almost physically painful. This is your life. Not temporarily. Not until things get better. This is it. You will wake at 3 a.m. and chop onions and haul water and dodge beatings until your body physically cannot do it anymore. And then you'll die and someone else will take your place, and the system will continue grinding along exactly as it always has. There's a reason medieval peasant revolts happened periodically throughout history. When enough people realize the system is designed to crush them, when the exploitation becomes too obvious to ignore, when even the threat of punishment isn't enough to keep people compliant, that's when revolts happen. But revolts are rare, they're brutally suppressed, and they almost never actually change the fundamental system. Most people, most of the time, just endure. Because what choice do they have? The afternoon brings a piece of news that spreads through the servants like wildfire. Lord Edmund is planning a hunt tomorrow, which means the kitchen will need to prepare provisions for a full day's outdoor entertainment for the nobles. This translates to even more work, even longer hours, even more opportunities for things to go wrong and someone to get beaten for it. You're already mentally preparing yourself for another pre-dawn wake-up, another day of relentless labor, another evening of falling into bed too exhausted to even remove your boots. And the truly soul-crushing part? This is actually one of the better medieval jobs. Kitchen servants at least work indoors, get fed, poorly but fed, and have some degree of job security. The people working the fields, the miners, the tanners who work with urine and feces and toxic chemicals, the dyers who work with substances that literally poison them, the laborers building cathedrals who fall from scaffolding and die, those people have it worse. You're fortunate by medieval standards. Lucky even. You have a roof over your head and food in your stomach and only get beaten a few times a week. That's your life. That's your fortune. That's your future. The day ends as it always does, with cleaning, with exhaustion, with the knowledge that tomorrow will be exactly the same. You fall onto your straw pallet, and despite the coughing from the sick servant nearby, despite the bedbugs that are definitely in the straw, despite the cold and the pain and the knowledge of tomorrow's suffering, you sleep. Because sleeping is the only escape you have. The only time you're not serving, not hurting, not enduring. And even your dreams, when they come, are often about work. About fires that won't light and swans that won't cook and William's hand rising to strike you. There is no escape. Not in waking, not in sleeping, not in living. This is medieval life for the bottom tier of society. No romance, no adventure, no quests or kingdoms or glory. Just endless, grinding labor in service to people who see you as slightly more valuable than furniture and slightly less important than their hunting dogs. You wouldn't last a day in this life. And you're lucky you don't have to. The fire in the hearth is dying down now, just like the day that came before and the day that will follow. Your eyes grow heavy, not with sleep exactly, but with that deep, bone-tired acceptance that only comes from knowing every truth there is to know about your place in this world. The stone walls around you have witnessed countless servants before you. Their struggles, their small rebellions, their eventual surrender to the inevitable rhythm of wake, work, survive. Outside these walls, frost is settling on the grounds again, quiet and beautiful and cold. Inside, the last embers glow softly, little orange eyes watching over the darkness. Your breathing slows, deepens, matching the gentle pulse of dying firelight. This was a hard story, wasn't it? A glimpse into a world without escape hatches or happy endings. But you're safe now, in your warm bed, in your modern world where you can choose what tomorrow brings. Where kitchen work is a job, not a life sentence. where dignity is a right, not a luxury. Let the images fade like smoke rising through a medieval chimney. Let the weight of those stone walls dissolve into softness. You've traveled far tonight, to a place that's gone now, preserved only in stones and stories and the quiet knowing that you were never meant to stay there. Rest now. Dream of kinder times, of mornings that come when you're ready for them, of choices and freedom and the simple, profound gift of being alive right now, in this moment, in this time. The medieval kitchen grows dimmer still, its fires banking to embers, its servants finally, mercifully still. And you drift away on gentle waves, carried safely home to your own soft darkness. Sweet dreams.